So, so a while ago, my sister asked me to try to explain the 12 steps in context of a spiritual awakening. You know, it's funny. I came to this park to get away from people, and the moment I start trying to make a video, people come walking by. Excuse the audio quality, by the way. My external mic died for some reason. I have to buy a new one. Anyway, 12 steps in regards to a spiritual awakening. In one sense, they totally work. You know, because anyone who's done a 12-step program, the real main purpose behind a 12-step program is to essentially disengage the ego. Through a myriad of different means and methods. So in regards to spiritual awakening, it is the same, you know, except that it's a little deeper. A lot deeper, actually. So if we take step one, you know, admitted we are powerless over method of escape, drug of choice, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. Escape is really the best term. You could think of it the same way spiritually. What's a good example? Spiritual egotism. That's a great example. Sorry, Christians, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. So, probably because that's one of the ones we have the most of us have experience with. It's one of the louder religions of the world. So, how do I want to put this? Okay, religion. Religion is a tool to practice one's beliefs. All right, that's the way I believe. So, you know, your rituals, your church, your everyday dogma, as it were, is just that. It's just a way to express your beliefs. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people out there seem to think if you don't do that particular dogma and routine, you are not, I don't know, practicing, or you're not a true believer, or whatever. This is one form of spiritual egotism. People thinking they're better than somebody else because they go to church every week and they sing in a worship choir and they read their Bible, and, you know, I mean, you could say the same thing about Muslims, you could say the same thing about, you know, Hindus, whatever, you know, I mean, This is why I always say all roads lead to Rome. Because the whole point of all of that is to basically get you to remember, RE-member, reintegrate yourself with the divine. Whatever label you put on that. Whether you call it your higher power, you call it God, you call it Jesus, you call it Yahweh. I don't care if it's the ancient Egyptian gods, if it's Anubis, Sekhmet, whatever. Ra. The list goes on and on. I'm not going to get into all that. That's not the point. The point is to reconnect with the divinity within you. Okay. What I believe is very similar to a theory that actually came out of the first time I believed this long before I read these books, but the first time I ever saw anyone put it in a very good, succinct manner was a set of books called Conversations with God. And great set of books if you haven't read it, by the way. The general gist of it is it's a very frustrated, depressed person who's a writer, and he sits down one night to write an angry letter to God, and God answers him through his own writing. And the whole set of it's a series of books. The first one's more about personal stuff, and then it goes on into a more macro vision of the world and global things and geopolitics and essentially spiritual warfare. In it, he describes God, the universe, Goddess, Source, creation itself. Created everything, time, space, the universe, every atom that is in every living creature, plant, animal, or otherwise. But in order to fully experience their creation, they had to break themselves into an infinite number of pieces and allow those pieces to experience or be within the creation instead of, I don't want to say outside of it, but observing it maybe, aka a soul. And that's part of the purpose of the soul, is to go through the journey of experiencing the creation of the Creator in all its myriad forms, good, bad, and indifferent. This is why we live in a world of relativity. You don't know here without there, and you don't know the in-between without the both. Hence, there's always three sides to every coin. Everybody says there's two. No, there's a third. And the whole point to all of that is to not just experience what has been created, but the infinite number of possibilities of the way creation and life can happen. And to remember that you are part of that. This is why we're essentially, on a spiritual level, born with amnesia. Because if we remembered all of that at birth, which I do suspect that some of us do, what would be the point? You wouldn't be totally immersed in the experience to actually have the experience. It would kind of defeat the purpose. So no matter what religion you think or believe, it is just literally a tool to practice your beliefs. And the whole point of that is to bring you back to, reconnect you back to Source. So how does this coincide with 12 steps? Okay, so you take the first step. Admitted that we are powerless over, and that our lives have become unmanageable. That's the traditional. So how it applies to the spiritual awakening, I would think, would be something along like, admitted that we were powerless over we'll say dogma in the respect of certain traditions and practices and that our spiritual lives or our energetic lives had become unmanageable. In a sense, a form of energetic codependency, which codependency ties into the energetics of people and exchange and all that other shit anyway. We'll get into that. Most people, okay, when you look at a 12-step program from the aspect of addiction and alcoholism or codependency, you're dealing with primarily the emotional state or the emotional body. Now, most people think of your experience as three separate bodies. You have your physical, mental, and emotional. Well, you also have your spiritual. And while they can be observed separately in many cases, at the same time, they're very intrinsically linked and intertwined. Once again, it's all relative. You can't have one without the other, and you can't experience one without experiencing some of the others. So you want to become more spiritual. You want to have a spiritual awakening. You want to see the world in a very spiritual way. And I use this term kind of loosely. Even that term itself has certain stigmas to it. There are a lot of fanatic religious people who don't like that term because it implies that you exercise a little too much of your free will and you don't adhere to the dogma of said religion. And of course, most religions, if you look at it, free will is a very contradictory term. It's considered one of the greatest gifts we were ever given from the Creator, but then at the same time, it's also considered, a lot of times, more often than not, the gateway to sin or evil, as it were. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Really, there's a reason in there, and the reason is choice. And yes, we have the power of free will, and we have the power of choice. And the whole point is to choose for lack of better terms at the moment, a path that leads you back to grace. Ideally. At the same time, if you didn't experience the other side, you wouldn't know if you were walking in grace or not. So, more often than not, to put it in a very divine dichotomy or bipolar, definitive black and white way to say it is, more often than not, the path to heaven goes through hell. Because you won't know that you're actually living in a Garden of Eden. To put it in very conventional, easy to understand terms. Most people have a basic understanding of one of the forms of Catholicism. And, they always talk about, paradise and not, you live in paradise right now. You live on a planet that literally has the resources to provide for every single one of your needs and wants. Period. We just don't see it that way. Most people don't. So really for me, like the first step in adapting the 12 steps as to how it would apply to a spiritual awakening is if you find yourself doing a particular set of practices and dogma and it is not fulfilling to you, and it seems to only cause stress and anxiety, you don't really feel it. And when I say that, here's the saying I came up with when I was about 16. It's hear with the mind, listen with the heart, and feel with the soul. So if those three aspects don't truly connect to that particular set of practices you're doing, then you're giving your spiritual power away. You're not being true to your higher self. You're not being aligned to what your soul actually wants and what your soul wants to experience. And that is very similar to addicts and hardcore codependents and everything, who may have all of the great material things in life, but what they lack is a certain fulfillment. They lack a particular, usually a form of self-love. And they constantly seek outside validation and approval to try to fix this internal problem, not realizing that they really need to give themselves the approval and validation. So same thing. We'll put it in very practical terms. Stop worrying so much about whether or not you go to church every Sunday. Stop worrying about whether or not you read a particular Bible verse every day. Stop worrying about whether or not you pray to the east 5 times a day. The one thing that is true with almost every religion that I've ever read on, and I haven't read on all of them, the source, the universe, the creator, is very benevolent. It's unconditional love when you really break it all down. Then why do we keep applying all these conditions onto whether or not we're going to receive that love? It's the one thing I could never understand. Oh, if I don't do this and this and this and this, then I'm not worthy of God's love. That's not true at all. But at the same time, 2 chapters later, you tell me that God is unconditional love. That doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't make any sense is because we've taken the human experience and we've applied it to that. We've personified. We've applied the personification of parenting to most of the gods and deities that we believe in and or worship. Okay? Because it's easier for us to understand. It's the only way you can kind of put it in terms. Because anyone who's ever truly experienced the experience of God, love, or magic can never truly explain it. Because it's not something that the human language can explain. It's unexplainable. It's something that needs to be experienced. So we have personified these things to try to make it easier to understand and to try to teach and or guide people. Okay. And in a lot of ways, that's very helpful. You know, anybody out there who's got kids knows, yes, of course you have a particular love for your child that is indescribable. It is literally a part of you. Made in your image. Go figure. And most parents, not all, but most, want their children to achieve more than that they had. And they want to provide them with everything they possibly can to reach those achievements. And this is part of the reason we've put this personification on our higher powers. And it's true. Of course, it goes much deeper and much farther than that, though. But just like when you have kids, and no, I don't personally have kids. I do have a lot of nieces and nephews. So I'm familiar enough. You know, at some point, you got to cut the apron strings. You got to let them go out and experience the world. You can't protect them every day, forever. You hope that you've imparted enough knowledge to them that they'll be okay. But here's the thing. You don't love them any less even if they don't. You don't love them when they, you don't love them less when they make mistakes. You don't love them less when they misbehave. You might get frustrated. if your parents were anything like mine, more than likely the frustration was out of love and out of caring. The hell are you being so stupid for? Like, I already told you that shit was hot. Why are you touching it? Like, so I guess step one would be for, in regards to a spiritual awakening is, admitting that you're powerless over religious validation, and that energetically and spiritually your life had become unmanageable. Now, what that means in practical terms is this: stop judging yourself if you don't do your particular practice, all pun intended, religiously. You can experience your higher power or your divinity anywhere and everywhere. It's not in the past, it's not in the future, it's in the now. Right now. Right now. This second. Right now. Right now. You have to be in the moment to experience it. Moment for moment for moment for moment. There'll be more on this later.